Hey y'all, what's up? I have a long and lovely video for y'all today talking about all the tomato varieties that I am putting in my garden this year. My tried and true, my favorites. First, I wanted to tell you about something we had going on this week. I'm standing now in front of our future tea and herb garden. Little nursery greenhouse we're putting together. This project has been on a standstill because it has been raining nonstop for the last handful of days. Even though it did slow down our project, it did give me time to spend inside on my computer planning out where everything was going to be planted in this garden. I've been using the Seed Time garden planning program. We have worked with Seed Time in the past, and this Thursday we're actually co-hosting a free webinar that shows their program and how it can help you maximize your garden space, lining out when you need to start things, where they're going to be. It's a really, really cool program. We use it this Thursday. Jeremiah is going to be joining me in that workshop. We're going to be showing him the program, and I'd love for you guys to join us for that live chat. If you're interested in that, there will be a link down below in this video, right above the list of all the tomato varieties that you can click on and sign up for. It's completely free. If you can't attend the webinar live, that's completely fine. If you sign up in that link, you will get a link to the replay and all of the information. But I think it's going to be a lot of fun. Jeremiah is going to be joining me in that live chat, and we're going to be teaching him how to use the program. He's helping me a lot in the garden this year, so I think it's going to be a really cool tool for his very organized brain to utilize. But yeah, all right, let's geek out on tomatoes now. Hey there, darlings. Welcome back to Roots and Refuge Farm, where today we're in my greenhouse and we are going to talk about plant varieties for our summer gardens. I actually decided to split this video into two parts. So in this part, we're going to talk about tomatoes. In the next part, we're going to talk about pepper varieties. So please do make sure you are subscribed so you catch that next video. I'm going to shoot it right after I shoot this one, so it'll come out sometime in the next week or so. But if you're new here, hi, my name is Jess. I love the garden and everything that it entails. I love sharing about the garden. Before YouTube, I was a very passionate gardener, and I didn't have a lot of people in my life that were quite as ready to geek out on it as I was. I did have some enthusiastic gardeners in my life, I will say that, but I thought about gardening all the time. I spent so much time planning my garden, planting my garden, working in my garden, and I felt at that time like a lot of my friendships and stuff, I kind of wore them out talking about the garden because it's all I wanted to talk about. Then comes along the opportunity to make YouTube videos, and I remember at the beginning of that just being like, oh, I won't bore you with the varieties. And everybody was like, what? Tell us the varieties, we want to know. And in that, I found my people who are just as excited about what goes in the garden as I am. Fast forward now 8-9 years later, and here we are still talking about this subject, and I'm not tired of it yet. And so I think there are many of you who aren't tired of it either. So today the topic is tomatoes. Interestingly, back then, the very beginning of my YouTube career, my first video to really like get big fast was a complete total info dump about growing tomatoes. I mean, just like all the nitty gritty details that I had gathered and learned. And I'll put a link to that video. It is definitely a throwback, but it's still great information. I still use the tips and the things shared in that video, and it's a really good place to start if you're wanting to learn to grow great tomatoes at home. It tells you what you need to know. It's definitely the fruit of my somewhat obsessive tendency to research things absolutely to death. This year, I am actually doing something a little different. And I will tell you that this has been intensely challenging. Normally, I would have shot my variety videos by now. I'm getting ready to start seeds. Normally, I have all of this lined out 2 months ago. But I have decided to restrict myself somewhat in my garden this year, and it's for a couple of reasons. My garden's gotten really big over the last handful of years of like teaching and making videos and stuff like that, and it kind of got to the point that I was doing it more for other people than for myself, and it broke my heart because I miss my garden. I love my garden. I love to garden, and this year, in an attempt to keep my space from becoming overwhelming, it's still going to be a very big garden, not as big, but I'm actually only growing my tried and true. I'm only growing my favorite things that I know do really well for me, and I'm keeping it a little simple. So this year, this is my tomato list. This is cherries and slicers. This is not a lot. I have grown as many as 100 varieties of tomatoes in 1 year before. So I'm still going to be growing quite a lot of plants because I still do plan on canning a good bit of tomatoes. I'm not really growing to can, but I am growing to eat fresh and can some. This is one of the things I'm still planning on preserving a good bit of. But I'm keeping it really simple, and I have restricted myself. So if you have seen videos in the past where I talk about favorites and they're not on that this list, they didn't do anything wrong. It was very hard for me to simplify it down to this point, but I'm actually really excited about this because I think that it's going to give me a real solid W this year. I'm going to have a win. I'm going to have a garden that I really love everything that's coming out of it, and I don't have plants that aren't producing well or are getting very sick, or I don't know what to do with what they're producing. I'm only growing plants that I know I love. This is my favorite things garden. That's what 2025 is for me. And if I hate this, which I don't think I would hate it. I mean, how can you hate a garden of your favorite things? If I wish I had more variety and experimentation, I'll go wild next year. So we'll see how that goes. Wherever it is that you are gardening with whatever experience or set of circumstances that you're gardening with, I would encourage you that you can take the advice of somebody else and listen to what it is that they like or they don't like, but find out your favorites list from your own experiences. I like giving recommendations of varieties, and sometimes people absolutely love them. Sometimes people either don't like them or they don't perform well for them because we're all gardening in different places. I personally don't take anybody else's advice on plant varieties as law. I take them as loose suggestions for me to try things out and decide my decision about them. All right, let's jump in. Oh, I can't believe this list is so short. For the people who are new, you're like, what are you talking about? This is several varieties. For the people who have been here for a while, you're like, Jess, what has happened to you? I usually grow about 15 to 20 cherry tomato plants. I'm probably gonna, maybe a few less than that. I'm gonna grow one row in my, I think they're 16-foot beds over here. That's a lot of cherry tomatoes, but I do like to eat those fresh. We eat a lot of them. Everybody kind of snacks on them around here. Some of my family doesn't. A lot of the people who visit snack on them, I should say that. It's just mostly a couple of my kids and me that will eat cherry tomatoes, but I really like dehydrating them, and that is something that we will still do a good bit of this year because dehydrated cherry tomatoes are a really good snack, and actually some of my kids that won't eat a fresh cherry tomato will eat a dehydrated one. So the things that I kept in mind in minimizing my list was performance. I wanted to only grow plants that I knew really did well here. There's one exception, which I will get to that. Variety. I only have 5 varieties of cherry tomatoes here, and with space for roughly 15 plants, that means I'll grow about 3 plants of each of these. That's a lot of cherry tomatoes. I will be harvesting buckets full of cherry tomatoes, but I wanted that to be a varied buckets full of cherry tomatoes. I want to have different colors, different flavors, things that I look for personally. I don't like really, really thick skins. Now, some of that is the variety. Some of that comes from how much water your plant is getting and how much stress it's under. So if you've tried something and you're like, oh, I hated that, the skin was just so thick, some of that can be in care. And especially if you're hearing a lot of other people not having that experience, you may want to look at how frequently you're watering that plant if you're ending up with that issue. All right, so let's actually start talking about the varieties. The first one I chose, this is kind of always at the top of my varieties list, wild boar berries. This is a Wild Boar Farms variety, and it comes in a few different options. There's like the wild boar berries, which is like red and it has these really neat purple shoulders, and then they have a yellow version, and then they have a cream version. Now, Brad Gates is Wild Boar Farms. Multiple tomatoes on this list are from him. He breeds tomatoes out in California. I like buying his seeds directly from him. He's got a website. He's a really great guy and doing really great things developing new cool varieties of tomatoes. I really like the Wild Boar berries. All 3 of those are really great. I will probably grow like the cream one this year, the cream berries. There's also yellow, there's the red one. I don't know which one I'll end up grabbing out of my seeds or what I'll start. Maybe I'll start some of all of them and just pick a couple plants at random. But those varieties, the wild boar berries, they are so productive in my garden. The plants are taller than all the rest. They put on way more fruit than all the rest. They are always the first to produce, usually the last to still be producing. I love the anthocyanins in them. They have these really neat purple shoulders on these little cherry tomatoes. Anthocyanins develop in sunlight, which that's the purples in multiple different types of plants. So when you pluck the little tomato off, where the stem was leaves like this little flower print. It's just, they're neat looking and they're really delicious. This is one I have heard people say that they have thick skins in their garden. I've never personally experienced that, but we do get a lot of rain where I live. So my garden is always really amply and regularly watered by rain and by me. If you like thinner cherry tomato skins, yellow and cream varieties are typically going to have thinner skins than red varieties. That being said, yellow and cream varieties are more prone to splitting. So I'm not 100% sure which one of the wild boar berries I'm gonna do, but that's always the top of my list. Next is honey drop. So my first tomato love was sun golds. Honey drops were actually developed from sun golds, and I actually don't know who initially developed this plant. Both of these ones that I'm mentioning, these are not heirlooms. They are open pollinated hybrids. They are plants that you can isolate blooms and save seeds from. But they're not F1 hybrids, so they're stabilized, but they're recently developed within the last, decade or so. So they'll be heirlooms in another 40 years or something like that. But right now they're considered open pollinated hybrids. Honey drop is a dark orange offshoot of a sun gold, if you've ever heard of sun golds, and they are absolutely delicious. I will say flavor wise, not necessarily performance wise, but flavor wise, honey golds are the most popular tomato I grow in my whole garden. When people come over, they taste those. I've had many people tell me that's the best tomato I've ever tasted. They're so sweet and so fruity. I love them. They are also pretty prolific. The next one that I've got on my list is Rosella. Rosella is a dark, what you would call a purple tomato. It's not a true purple. It's just like a really dusky red cherry tomato. Also, it's very similar to a variety called black cherry. They're a little bit on the larger side. They're a little larger than these other cherry tomatoes that I have mentioned. But the main reason I put Rosella on is because I wanted that variety. With that dark, dusky color, you typically have more umami flavor, which is a more savory note. Whereas your yellows and your oranges are going to be way more fruity and citrusy. And that dusky red is going to have more of that rich, like kind of ketchup-y type flavors. And I've experienced Rosella that way. I really like it, as I said, for the variety. And it's just a really good, solid, dark red tomato. It's pretty prolific. It's not the most prolific, but it stays healthy, and I've had really good experiences growing it. Next is Sweetie Cherries. A solid, classic red cherry tomato. Grows a lot of fruit. Skins aren't terribly thick, but they don't split super easily. Very prolific, stays very healthy in my garden. So that checked the box as far as what red I was going to grow. And last of my cherry tomatoes is Brad's Atomic Grape. I don't grow this one necessarily for myself. This is another Wild Boar Farms variety. This is a large, I would say more grape tomato, more than a cherry. They're longer and a little bit bigger. Some of them can even get to the size of being like a really small paste tomato. They can get kind of on the bigger side. They're real wild looking, streaky, lots of colors. The plants themselves, I have found, at least for me in my garden, they grow relatively wispy, but they're hardy enough, they stay healthy enough, and we usually get a really good harvest off of some plants. Malia, my daughter, absolutely loves these tomatoes, and I have been growing them in my garden for her for years, since I first learned about this tomato. I think since it was probably the year it was released publicly. I've been growing these in my garden for Malia because she loves them. And so even though I was downsizing my cherry tomatoes, of course I had to include Malia's favorite. Some honorable mentions that I am not putting on my list because I am exercising great self-control and keeping things very simple this year. There's Barry's Crazy Cherry, which is a Wild Boar Farms variety. Oh man, can I really not grow that? I just don't think I can do it. This is what I'm saying. I will say to you guys, I can't believe I'm so silly. I'm just thinking about eating them right now, and I'm like, can I really go this year without eating them? Because you can't buy them from the store. You have to grow these kinds of things if you want them. They don't exist at the store. I think I'm gonna have to grow it. I've got to add one more. Barry's Crazy Cherry. I can't honorable mention it. I just can't do it. See, okay, I will tell y'all this. Well, okay, Barry, let me tell you about Barry's Crazy Cherry. Why he's sneaking on the list right now in front of you all. Multiflora, which means this tomato plant sets these huge clusters of blossoms, which means it grows these huge clusters of fruit. Actually, sometimes if your plants are setting like monster clusters, that's like 100+ blossoms in one section, it may do your plant well to like cut some of them off, just so the fruit bunch doesn't get so big that it breaks the branch of the plant off. Like, I have to extra support these. Really, that's not exactly why I grow them, though that is very fascinating. It's the fruit. It's like really pale yellow fruit, very thin skin. Like, if it's gonna rain, you need to get out and pick them because they will split. The skins are so thin, but they have this really light, bright, and a sweet flavor. My cousin Amy never ate tomatoes, but Barry's Crazy Cherry made her a tomato lover. And I just feel like I have to grow. Okay, so 6 varieties. We'll see how it goes. Other honorable mentions that I'm really not gonna add to the list because I thought about them ahead of time. Bumblebee, there's a variety that has 3 different colors called Bumblebee. There's like Sunrise, and there's a pink Bumblebee, and then there's another one, I can't remember what it's called, like a dark red. And I really like those. They're really streaky. They're a little bit on the larger side. They're one that, though, I really like. When I was like minimizing the list down, I'm like, I could do without that. It's a good one, but I don't have to have it. There are other tomatoes that kind of fill that gap. Dancing with Smurfs is one that I really, really like. It's a dark purple anthocyanin filled tomato. There was a lot of kind of scandal last year because the first GMO tomato was released, and I saw a lot of people commenting who were excited to grow it. Of course, a lot of people, I'm not a big fan of introducing any sort of GMO seeds into a home garden, but a lot of people were, you know, sharing their excitement about the purple, and I was like, what are you talking about? Dancing with Smurfs is an excellent dark purple tomato full of anthocyanins. Now, the flesh on the inside is more red, whereas I think that other one was more purple on the inside. But if you're wanting like a real flashy, cool, and unusual looking cherry tomato, I really do like Dancing with Smurfs, but it's not on my list this year. Next, let's go into the slicers. I'm feeling pretty confident about my pared down list here. We'll see if I make it through telling you guys about it without adding anything to it, though. The first one, now, anytime people ask me what is your most favorite tomato, if you could only grow one, I tell them I can't choose one. I can narrow it down to 2. And my most favorite top 2 tomatoes is Dr. Wyche's Yellow, a large yellow slicer. I prune my tomatoes because I live in a very humid climate, and they do better by pruning them down to one main lead. And with that being the case, my Dr. Wyche's Yellow pretty much always grows 1 pound fruits. Pretty much every fruit that it sets is at least 14 ounces, but usually a full pound, and sometimes they go as high as 2 pounds each. I don't know that they would grow that large, like the fruits would grow that large if you were not pruning and your plant was bushing out a lot, because it would be setting more fruit, and typically they don't get as big whenever you do that. But with pruning, very consistent 1 pound fruits. It's yellow all the way through. It has a nice thin skin and a fantastic flavor. this tomato just stole my heart the first year I grew it, and it has been one of my most favorite tomatoes since then. My other top tomato is Paul Robeson. This is a purple, and by that, a dark red. It's very much known for that umami flavor, that savory note that has like a rich depth to it. And the reason why these two together are my favorite is if you want to make the best tomato sandwich of your life, take one of those yellow tomatoes and one of those dark red tomatoes and slice them real thin and just make a stack of alternating slices. And it is everything you could ever hope for in tomato sandwich. Is that you get like just the whole spectrum of tomato flavor between the two of them. So yeah, those two are at the top of the list. Without question, if I could only grow two, that would be the two that I would grow, because again, I feel like you get the best of what tomatoes can offer with those flavors. And for the most part, I grow those for fresh eating. When I make salsas, sauce, diced tomatoes that I'm canning, when I dehydrate tomatoes, whenever I freeze dry tomatoes, I use these Heirloom slicers. I don't grow a specific, like, oh, this is my canning tomato, or this is the hybrid that's high production, or, you know, a lot of people will try to grow specifically like San Marzanos or different things like that. I don't do that. I pretty much use Heirloom slicers for everything. They can be a little juicier than other tomatoes. There can be a little more seeds and pulp, but most of the ones that I grow are very meaty. Like Dr. Ritchie's yellow does not have a whole lot of seeds in it. It's got a lot of flesh to it. But this is also why, like my salsa recipe, which I've shared multiple times, I've got videos of it, I roast the tomatoes, and that makes a lot of the liquid run out. Anytime that I'm making sauce, I freeze tomatoes throughout the season so that I can process them at the end of the season rather than having to do it on the time frame. And what I do is I just core the middle and score the bottom and put them in freezer bags. And then when I thaw them out, a lot of that juice runs out. And so I'm left with the meaty part. And that's what I primarily like make sauces out of. And so I don't have an issue with these being too watery for sauces. That being said, there are two varieties that I've included on this list because 4 big Heirloom slicers, these are really good preserving tomatoes. The first one is Abe Lincoln Original. The nature of saving seeds in heirloom varieties is, you know, let's say I have the Abe Lincoln tomato growing in my garden. Joe Schmo is growing Abe Lincoln in his garden. It's always Joe Schmo, and let's say that Joe Schmo's Abe Lincoln actually crosses a little bit with the Brandywine that's next to it. And he saves the seeds and he marks Abe Lincoln on it. And he grows it, and it's mostly like the Abe Lincoln. And so he keeps growing that, and then he ends up sharing those with somebody. And then let's say I share it with somebody, and let's say that those seeds actually cross a little bit. And over time, the nature of heirlooms, you know, we might not have the exact same variety. And so it may be called the same variety, but if you get seeds from different places, there is a chance that you're going to have some variation. That means if you really, really, really like a fruit that's growing in your garden, you should save some seeds from it, so that you can absolutely guarantee they're going to have the seeds again. Plus, it's cheaper. You don't have to spend money buying more seeds. Abe Lincoln is one of those tomatoes that I grew it the first time, and it was called Abe Lincoln Original. And I got these really big, awesome, huge red slicers that were super meaty, almost paste-like. And then I grew it another time from some seeds I got somewhere else, and they were significantly smaller. I'm using saved seeds now, but if I am sourcing seeds for Abe Lincoln, I make sure either the description says that it's a really big tomato or that it says Abe Lincoln Original. So just a note on that, when you are looking to source seeds, if you are looking for a variety, you may want to read the description and make sure it's what you're expecting. The Abe Lincoln Original is very large, very commonly 1 to 2 pound fruits on these plants, very few seeds. I mean, it is solid flesh, and it's very tasty. It's just like a classic red tomato. It grows well for me. Again, while I am growing all of these and I use all these heirloom slicers for processing, I like to have a couple of really good, very meaty red tomatoes to sort of be a backbone for everything, so that when I am processing my diced tomatoes and sauces and all that stuff, there is that consistency. The other one, which is extremely similar to the Abe Lincoln Original, is called Italian Heirloom. Honestly, if I grew them side by side, and did not look at tags, I'm not 100% sure that I could differentiate between these two plants. And these are the only two varieties on my list that are very similar that I'm growing, but it's for that same reason. I mean, if I'm going to have a backbone of all of my processing, like big meaty red slicers are kind of what I want it to be. Next, I've got 5 varieties that are all for the sake of diversity. I want to have different flavors, different colors to experience different things out of my tomatoes. And I'll process them all together, but for fresh eating, I like to be able to mix it up. The next one is Thornburn's TerraCotta. This is such a cool tomato. It actually came onto my list just a handful of years ago. I've grown it ever since then and really, really like it. I would say I like the fruit as much as I like Dr. Wyche's or Paul Robeson. The plants are not as productive for me. They don't seem to be as healthy for me. I don't know if they struggle with our humidity. It is very hot where I am, and some tomato plants do struggle with that. But nonetheless, I grow them anyway. They have this really neat terracotta colored fruit that tastes different than any other tomato I've ever grown. And so I really like them, and I grow them even if they aren't the absolute most productive. These other tomatoes make up for that. So this year, whenever I'm only growing this handful of varieties, I probably won't do a ton of plants of those terracotta ones, but I will do a handful of plants, just more than anything for fresh eating because they're so cool. Next, Wild Boar Farms Black Beauty. High anthocyanin. This is a tomato that without a lot of sunlight, it's like a pinkish red. The inside is pinkish red, but everywhere where the fruit gets touched by the sun, the fruits turn like dark purple, almost black. And the flavor's really nice. It's like a real bright pink tomato flavor. And they're just really beautiful. They're unusual. I love growing them. The only thing with Black Beauty is I grow my tomatoes under a shade cloth because we live in South Carolina. It's very hot and the plants typically do better. But if I grow the Black Beauties under shade cloth, the fruit doesn't turn dark. It stays kind of reddish and just a tiny blush of black on the shoulders. And so I've actually got to plant these plants intentionally along the back side of my beds where they're going to get more direct sun or out from underneath the shade cloth. In which case then the plants kind of struggle a little bit with the heat, but I just have to be mindful. One year I planted like 20 of these in the high tunnel because I wanted to have a whole bunch of them, and none of them turned black. And I was like, well, that didn't work. Did not work out. Next, I've got an or. I'm going to pick one, and it just depends on what seeds I've got. Either large barred boar or pink Berkley tie-dye from Wild Boar Farms. Pink Berkley tie-dye is the pink version of this tomato. Large barred boar is the red version of this tomato. They're extremely similar, very streaky, stripy, large slicer from Wild Boar Farm. I love the flavor. They're very unusual, and they're healthy, and they do really well in my garden. Next, Aunt Ruby's German Green. This is a green fruit tomato. You have to watch these when you're growing these because there's not a very obvious difference between unripe and ripe. You have to like squeeze them a little bit, and you have to kind of keep a close eye on them because you may miss that they've turned ripe because they ripen to green. You may have heard of fried green tomatoes. That's not what these are for. Fried green tomatoes are any tomato variety that are unripe, that you cut unripe and you fry and eat. These green tomatoes you actually eat ripe as you would any other tomato. They get nice and soft, they slice easy, you can use them on a tomato sandwich or in salads. The flavor is different. They have a more, I don't know if it's because they're green and I have the mental idea that I connect with this, or they remind me a little bit of like a Granny Smith apple. But if it was a tomato, it tastes like a tomato, but like it has a flavor note to it that's kind of similar to a Granny Smith apple. It's just got a real crisp, tart bite. And again, going for the variety and the diversity, I wanted to make sure I threw a green tomato in. And of all the green tomatoes, Aunt Ruby's German Green has always been the healthiest in my garden. They all taste about the same to me. There's another, like Malachite Box is one, and there are a few different green tomatoes that are relatively popular heirlooms. And they all more or less taste the same to me, but Aunt Ruby's German Green produces good sized slicers and they stay the healthiest for me. The last one, that's how short this list is, the last one that I will have in my garden this year, which I'm gonna tell you right now, this plant always gets sick. It's always the first one to get sick. I tear it out first. I grow it every year anyway, and that's brandywine. My granddaddy grew brandywines. My earliest memories of anybody gardening was my granddaddy starting seeds in his sun porch and, you know, having his garden, and he used to have all of his little tomatoes laid out on a paper towel. He would bring them in and wash them and leave them there by the sink, and I very vividly remember him cutting them up and putting salt on them and sharing them with me when I was little, and that was his favorite tomatoes. And so kind of as an ode to him, I'm sentimental. I always grow the brandywines. They are neat, and they do have a great classic tomato flavor. They're potato leaf variety, which is cool. They have a different shape foliage than most tomatoes do. But they are notorious for getting sick. I mean, they are just really fussy as far as blight goes, and that's an issue for us, but being humid. But I grow them just the same. I haven't figured out the breakdown yet of like what varieties I'm going to plant certain amounts of. Like for instance, the ones like Thorburn's TerraCotta that don't grow super huge fruit and aren't super prolific. I may only grow like 4 or 5 of those plants, whereas my favorite ones, in order to have enough to be able to do some canning, I mean, I'll probably have to grow at least 10 or 15 of each of those. I have grown as many as like 250 tomato plants in the past, but that was when I was really focused on trying to can like a year's worth of things, and this year I'm focusing less on that, but I'm not 100% sure. I'm trying to, again, I'm really going for fresh eating this year, and I'm really going for loving the garden, and not becoming so overwhelmed with so much to keep up with that I don't really have time to cook and enjoy the food that we are currently, when we're bringing it in. So before I start listing off the different varieties on this list, people often ask me where I like to get my seeds. I will put a couple of links to some different seed purveyors that I regularly frequent. If you hear of a variety of plant that you want to grow, you know, if you have a seed company that you like to purchase from, obviously you can always go to their website and type the plant in and see if they carry it. But you can just put the names of plants in a search engine. For instance, like I've got Paul Robeson tomatoes here. If you put Paul Robeson tomato seeds into a search engine, the top results are going to be places where you can buy those seeds for the most part. Honestly, I don't know a single place that necessarily carries every single one of these varieties, but I can put links to where I get them, and you can check them out. But if you were to like say, oh, I want to buy your entire list, you would have to go to multiple places. And at this point, you know, I'm growing from a lot of seeds that I saved from these, but as I said, I'll put some links to places that I know down below, and I will also write this list out so you have the spelling of each one of these if you want to look them up. That's my list for the year. What are your varieties that you absolutely, I don't even know if I want to ask that question. I'm going to ask that question because it's a good question and we should discuss it, but I'm going to be reading all your comments like, oh yeah, that is a good one. Like itching to put it on here. I will also say this. There's a big plant sale in my area, and there are always like some really cool vendors that have some really cool things. When I say this is what I'm growing and I am keeping it simple, it's kind of like that shoot for the moon, and even if you miss, you'll land among the stars thing. I'm gonna shoot for this abstinence, and even if I miss, I'll land somewhere on this side of moderation. Hopefully. That's kind of what I'm going for. And truly, if there are varieties that I do love that don't kind of sneak past the gate like Barry's Crazy Cherry did there, and I miss them this year, there's always next year. So I will definitely know at the end of this season if this is for me or if I absolutely must have all the varieties. So tell me, what do you love? Do you think I'm crazy, or do you think that this is going to be good? Thank you guys for hanging out with me today. Make sure that you're subscribed to be able to see part 2 of this video where we talk about peppers. I bless you. Until next time.